The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floor of Henderson Marketing Solutions as their newest potential client walked through the glass doors. David Thompson had built his tech consulting company from nothing into a powerhouse that worked with Fortune 500 companies. Today he was supposed to meet with the agency's owner about a deal that could change both their futures. But plans had changed at the last minute. David's original meeting was scheduled for next Tuesday, but an unexpected flight delay from his weekend business conference in Chicago meant he found himself with 3 free hours in the city. Instead of sitting in his hotel room, he decided to drop by the marketing agency unannounced. After all, the best way to judge a company's true character was to see how they handled unexpected situations. He dressed casually that morning, throwing on his favorite pair of dark jeans and a simple navy polo shirt. The conference had been exhausting, and he wanted to be comfortable. His leather messenger bag hung across his shoulder, containing the contract proposal that could bring Henderson Marketing Solutions their biggest payday ever. $2.3 million over 18 months. It was the kind of deal that could double their revenue. The building itself impressed him. Located in the heart of downtown, it screamed success with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern architecture. The lobby sparkled with expensive fixtures and artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars. This was exactly the kind of environment his corporate clients would expect their marketing partners to operate from. As David approached the reception desk, he noticed a young woman in her early 20s sitting behind the glossy white counter. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a crisp white blouse that suggested professionalism. But her attention was completely absorbed by her smartphone, her thumbs moving rapidly across the screen as she typed out what looked like a text message. David waited politely for a moment, expecting her to look up and acknowledge his presence. When she didn't, he cleared his throat softly and offered a friendly smile. "Excuse me," he said in his usual calm, professional tone. "I'd like to speak with someone about a potential business partnership. Is the owner available?" The receptionist, whose nameplate read Ashley, barely glanced up from her phone. Her eyes swept over him dismissively, taking in his casual clothes and relaxed appearance. Something shifted in her expression, a subtle change that David had unfortunately encountered before in his career. "We're not hiring today," she said curtly, her voice carrying an edge of annoyance. "And we don't accept walk-in applications. You'll need to apply online like everyone else." David blinked, momentarily taken aback. In all his years of business, he'd never been mistaken for a job seeker when visiting a potential partner. He maintained his professional composure, though, and tried again. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said patiently. "I'm not looking for a job. I'm here about a consulting contract. I believe your boss has been trying to set up a meeting with my company." Ashley's expression grew more irritated. She set her phone down with an audible sigh, as if his presence was a major inconvenience to her day. "Look, I don't know what kind of sales pitch you're trying to pull here, but Mr. Henderson is extremely busy. He doesn't have time to meet with every person who walks in off the street claiming they have some big business opportunity." The condescending tone in her voice was unmistakable now. David felt his jaw tighten slightly, but years of experience in corporate America had taught him to stay calm in situations like this. He'd built his company by being the bigger person, even when others weren't. "I understand he's busy," David replied evenly. "Perhaps you could call his office and let him know that David Thompson from Thompson Tech Solutions is here? I think he'll want to take the meeting." Ashley rolled her eyes dramatically, a gesture that would have gotten her fired at any respectable company David had ever worked with. "Thompson Tech, whatever," she said with obvious sarcasm. "I'm sure that's a real impressive company, but like I told you, we're not interested in whatever you're selling. Mr. Henderson specifically told me not to let any random salespeople disturb him today." David's eyebrows rose slightly. Random salespeople? The irony wasn't lost on him. Henderson Marketing had been calling his office for 3 months straight, trying to get just 5 minutes of his time. Their persistence had finally paid off when David's assistant scheduled the meeting for next week. Now here he was, ready to potentially hand them the biggest contract in their company's history, and he was being treated like a nuisance. "Ma'am," he said, his voice still controlled but with a slight edge creeping in, I think if you just make a quick call upstairs, we can clear this up in 30 seconds. Ashley's phone buzzed with what appeared to be a notification, and she immediately picked it up again, her attention drifting away from David completely. "Yeah, I'm not doing that," she said without looking up. "You need to leave. Now. Before. I have to call security." The threat hung in the air between them. David stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. In his 15 years of running a successful business, he'd never encountered such blatant unprofessionalism. Part of him wanted to turn around and walk out immediately, writing off Henderson Marketing as a company he'd never want to work with anyway. But another part of him was curious. Was this how they treated everyone who didn't fit their preconceived notions? Was this the kind of culture that Henderson had built? In his company? David pulled out his phone and opened his notes app. If this was how Henderson Marketing operated, he wanted to document it. Not for revenge, but because it would factor heavily into his decision about whether to do business with them. "You know what?" he said quietly. "I think I'll wait here for a few more minutes. Maybe someone else can help me." Ashley's head snapped up from her phone, her eyes flashing with anger. "Are you serious right now? I told you to leave. Do I need to spell it out for you? You don't belong here. This is a professional office building, not some community center where you can just hang out." The words hit David like a physical blow. The implication was clear, and it had nothing to do with his qualifications or his business. He'd heard variations of these same words throughout his career, subtle and not so subtle suggestions that he didn't belong in certain spaces. Other employees were starting to notice the commotion now. A few people in expensive suits walked past, glancing over at the scene unfolding at the reception desk. David watched their reactions carefully. Some looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Others seemed to simply accept that Ashley knew what she was doing. This told him everything he needed to know about Henderson Marketing's culture. David quietly activated his phone's recording app, holding the device naturally at his side. If this situation escalated further, he wanted evidence of exactly what was said and how it was said. "I'm going to ask you one more time to please call Mr. Henderson's office," David said calmly. "Tell him David Thompson is here about the consulting contract we've been discussing." Ashley stood up from her chair, her face flushed with anger and something else, something that made David's stomach turn. "I'm done being polite with you," she said loudly, her voice carrying across the lobby. "You need to get out of here right now or I'm calling the police." The entire lobby fell silent. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Every conversation had stopped. Every footstep had paused. All eyes were now focused on the reception desk where Ashley stood with her hands on her hips, glaring at David like he had personally insulted her entire family. David felt the weight of everyone's stare. This was the moment he'd experienced countless times before in his career, but it never got easier. The moment when a room full of people had to choose sides and most of them would choose the path of least resistance. "Stay quiet. Don't get involved. Pretend it's not happening. Did you not hear me?" Ashley's voice grew even louder, clearly, meant to draw more attention to the situation. "I said you need to leave now." A security guard who had been casually reading a newspaper in the corner of the lobby looked up with interest. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, with gray hair and a kind face. David could see him trying to figure out what was happening and whether he needed to intervene. "There's no need for all this drama," David said quietly, still maintaining his calm demeanor despite the growing crowd of onlookers. "I'm simply asking to speak with someone about a business matter, that's all." But Ashley wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed to be gaining confidence from the audience she'd attracted. Her voice took on a tone that made David's skin crawl. "Business matter?" She laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Look at yourself. Look at how you're dressed. You think you can just walk into a place like this and demand to speak with our CEO? Do you have any idea how many people would kill for 5 minutes with Mr. Henderson?" David glanced down at his clothes. His jeans were clean and well-fitted. His polo shirt was from an expensive brand. His shoes were leather loafers that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. There was nothing inappropriate or unprofessional about his appearance, especially for a casual Friday afternoon. But he understood what Ashley was really seeing. It wasn't his clothes she had a problem with. A woman in a sharp business suit walked by, pretending to check her phone but clearly listening to every word. David caught her eye for a moment, hoping to see some recognition of how wrong this situation was. Instead, she quickly looked away and hurried toward the elevators. Another employee, a young man who couldn't have been much older than Ashley, stopped to openly watch the confrontation. He pulled out his own phone and seemed to be texting someone, probably sharing the gossip with his coworkers upstairs. "You know what your problem is?" Ashley continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "You people always think you're entitled to special treatment. You think you can walk into any building and demand whatever you want." The phrase, "you people," hit David like a slap across the face. There it was, out in the open now, no more subtle hints or coded language. Ashley had shown her true colors for everyone in the lobby to see. David's phone was still recording everything, every word, every tone, every uncomfortable silence from the bystanders who were choosing to let this happen. "I'm not asking for special treatment," David replied, his voice steady but with steel underneath. "I'm asking for basic professional courtesy, the same courtesy you'd give to anyone else who walked through those doors." Ashley scoffed. "Professional courtesy? You want professional courtesy? Then maybe you should try acting professionally. Maybe you should make an appointment like a normal person instead of just showing up here expecting everyone to drop what they're doing for you." The security guard finally stood up and started walking over. David felt a moment of hope that someone was going to step in and de-escalate the situation. But as the guard got closer, David realized from his expression that he wasn't coming to help. "Is there a problem here?" the guard asked, but his question was directed at Ashley, not at both of them. "Yes, there is," Ashley said dramatically. "This man is refusing to leave. I've asked him multiple times to go and he won't listen. He's being very aggressive and making our other clients uncomfortable." David almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Aggressive? He hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't made any threatening gestures. He hadn't even stepped closer to the reception desk. If anything, he'd been remarkably restrained given the circumstances. "Sir," the guard said, turning to David with an apologetic but firm expression, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the building." "Before you do that," David said calmly, "maybe you should ask Ashley here to call Mr. Henderson's office. Think there might be some confusion about who I am and why I'm here." The guard looked uncertain for a moment, glancing between David and Ashley. It was clear he didn't want to get involved in office politics, but he also didn't want to make the wrong call. Ashley jumped in before the guard could respond. "I already told him Mr. Henderson is not seeing any walk-ins today, especially not people who can't even dress appropriately for a professional environment." That comment drew murmurs from some of the employees who were still watching. David saw a few of them exchange glances, and he wondered what they were thinking. Were they uncomfortable with Ashley's behavior, or did they agree with her assessment? Looking around the lobby, David started to notice things he hadn't paid attention to before. The artwork on the walls showed mostly white faces in positions of power and success. The employee photos displayed near the elevator showed a company that was notably lacking in diversity. The magazines on the waiting area table were all focused on industries and interests that catered to a very specific demographic. This wasn't just about Ashley's personal prejudices. This was about a company culture that had created an environment where she felt comfortable expressing those prejudices openly. "You know what I find interesting?" David said, speaking to the room as much as to Ashley. "Your company has been calling my office for 3 months trying to get a meeting. 3 months of phone calls and emails begging for just a few minutes of my time. And now here I am, ready to discuss a multi-million-dollar contract, and I'm being treated like a criminal." Ashley's face went red. "Multi-million-dollar contract? Are you serious? Do you think we're all stupid here? Do you think we don't know the difference between a real business owner and someone just pretending?" The security guard looked even more uncomfortable now. David could see him starting to realize that maybe there was more to this situation than Ashley had told him. "What makes you think I'm pretending?" David asked quietly. Ashley threw her hands up in exasperation. "Everything. Your clothes, your attitude, The way you just walked in here without an appointment. Real business owners don't act like this. They don't just show up and expect to be treated like they're important. How exactly do real business owners act? David pressed. They make appointments. They dress professionally. They understand how business works. They don't just... Ashley gestured at him dismissively. They don't just assume they belong everywhere. The last comment hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the lobby had heard it. Everyone understood what she was really saying. David looked around at all the faces staring at him. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. Some looked like they were enjoying the drama, but none of them looked like they were going to speak up. This was the test. This was how Henderson marketing really operated when they thought no one important was watching. David reached into his leather messenger bag and pulled out his wallet. The lobby was still buzzing with tension, and Ashley was glaring at him, like he had committed some terrible crime just by existing in her space. The security guard stood nearby, clearly torn between following Ashley's demands and his growing sense that something wasn't quite right about this whole situation. "Before anyone calls the police or throws me out of here," David said calmly, "maybe we should clear up exactly who I am." He pulled out a business card from his wallet. It was simple but elegant, printed on thick, expensive cardstock. The kind of business card that serious companies invested in because they understood that first impressions mattered. David placed the card gently on Ashley's desk, right in front of her keyboard where she couldn't miss it. Ashley glanced down at the card dismissively, clearly expecting to see something that would prove her point, maybe a card for some small local business or a handmade card from someone pretending to be more important than they were. But as her eyes focused on the text, her expression began to change. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth fell open slightly and she picked up the card with trembling fingers, reading it once, then twice, then a third time as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "David Thompson," she read aloud in a whisper. "Chief Executive, Officer, Thompson Tech Solutions." The business card also listed the company's address in the most expensive part of downtown, along with a phone number and email address that clearly belonged to a major corporation, not some small-time operation. But it was the company logo that really drove the point home. Thompson Tech Solutions had been featured in the local business journal just last month as one of the fastest-growing companies in the region. Their logo was recognizable to anyone who paid attention to the local business scene. Ashley's hands were visibly shaking now. She looked up at David with wide eyes, then back down at the card, then up at David again. It was like watching someone's entire world crumble in real time. This can't be real," she stammered. You're not, I'm not what?" David asked quietly. But there was steel in his voice now. The security guard had moved closer and was reading the business card over Ashley's shoulder. His eyes widened as he recognized the company name. He stepped back from Ashley like she had suddenly become radioactive. The other employees in the lobby had noticed the shift in energy. The young man who had been texting earlier was now staring at Ashley with obvious alarm. The woman in the business suit had stopped pretending to check her phone and was openly watching the drama unfold. "Mr. Thompson," the security guard said, his voice full of apology and concern, "I am so sorry about this misunderstanding. If I had known..." "If you had known what?" David interrupted. "Would it have mattered? Should it have mattered?" Ashley was frantically grabbing for her phone now, her fingers fumbling as she tried to find her boss's contact information. The same boss she had refused to call just minutes earlier when David had politely requested it. "Mr. Henderson," she said breathlessly into the phone, "you need to come down here right now. There's been a problem." David could hear the voice on the other end of the phone, muffled but clearly irritated. Henderson was obviously busy and didn't appreciate being interrupted for what he assumed was some minor reception desk issue. "No, you don't understand," Ashley continued, her voice rising with panic. "David Thompson is here. David Thompson from Thompson Tech Solutions. He's here right now and I..." The voice on the other end of the phone suddenly got very quiet, then very loud. Even from several feet away, David could hear Henderson's shocked exclamation through the phone speaker. "He's there? Right now? Why didn't you call me immediately?" Ashley's face crumpled. I thought I didn't realize. He was dressed so casually and he didn't have an appointment, and I just assumed. You assumed what? Henderson's voice was getting louder and more frantic. I've been trying to get a meeting with this man for months. This could be the biggest deal in our company's history. What did you do? The lobby had gone completely silent again. Everyone was listening to Ashley get torn apart by her boss over the phone. Some of the employees looked embarrassed. For her. Others looked like they were enjoying watching her get what she deserved. I'm coming down right now, Henderson said, and the phone line went dead. Ashley stared at her phone for a moment, then looked up at David with tears starting to form in her eyes. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. Please, can we start over? David studied her face carefully. The arrogance was gone now. The condescending attitude had vanished. The person standing in front of him was scared and desperate and trying to undo damage that couldn't be undone. What exactly are you sorry for? David asked. Ashley looked confused by the question. I'm sorry for not recognizing you, for not knowing who you were. That's what you're sorry for? David pressed. Not recognizing me? Ashley nodded eagerly, clearly thinking she was giving the right answer. Yes. If I had known you were the CEO of Thompson Tech Solutions, I never would have treated you like, I would have called Mr. Henderson right away and what about the next person who walks through those doors? David interrupted. The person who doesn't have a fancy business card or a big company? How will you treat them? Ashley's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She clearly hadn't expected that question. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and a man in an expensive suit came rushing out. Robert Henderson was in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of confidence that came from years of running a successful business. But right now he looked panicked and out of breath, like he had just run down 20 flights of stairs. Mr. Thompson, he called out as soon as he spotted David. I am so incredibly sorry about this misunderstanding. Please, let me apologize, personally, for any inconvenience you may have experienced. Henderson hurried over to the reception desk, shooting a look at Ashley that could have melted steel. Then he turned back to David with his most professional smile. I hope Ashley was able to help you while you waited, he said, clearly fishing to find out exactly how bad the situation was. David looked at Henderson for a long moment, then gestured toward the crowd of employees who were still watching the scene unfold. Why don't you ask them? David suggested. I'm sure they'd be happy to tell you exactly how helpful Ashley was. Henderson's smile faltered as he looked around at his staff. The expressions on their faces told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a small misunderstanding, this was a disaster. Ashley, Henderson said quietly, you're fired. Clear out your desk and leave immediately. Ashley gasped, like she had been slapped. But Mr. Henderson, I didn't know who he was. How could I have known? That's exactly the problem, Henderson replied coldly. You should treat everyone with respect, regardless of who you think they are. But David was already shaking his head. I'm afraid it's too late for that, Mr. Henderson. The lobby fell silent once more. Henderson looked at David with growing dread, already knowing what was coming but hoping he was wrong. This isn't just about Ashley, David continued. This is about the culture you've built here, the environment that made her think this kind of behavior was acceptable. David picked up his business card from Ashley's desk and slipped it back into his wallet. I think we're done here. David walked out of Henderson Marketing Solutions with his head held high, but his mind was racing. The cool afternoon air felt refreshing after the toxic atmosphere inside that building. As he made his way to his car, he pulled out his phone and looked at the recording he had made. 43 minutes of audio that captured everything from Ashley's initial dismissal to her desperate apologies. He sat in his car for a moment thinking about what had just happened. This wasn't just about one rude receptionist or one poorly managed company. This was about something much bigger, something that happened every day in offices across the country, usually without any consequences because the people it happened to didn't have the power or platform to fight back. David had built his company from nothing. He knew what it was like to walk into rooms where people made assumptions about him before he even opened his mouth. The difference was that now he had the resources and influence to do something about it. He opened his laptop and began typing. Today I had an experience that reminded me why diversity and respect in the workplace aren't just nice ideas, they're business necessities, he wrote. I visited a potential partner company for what should have been a routine business discussion. Instead, I was treated with such disrespect and unprofessionalism that I had to document it. David attached a carefully edited portion of the audio recording to his post. He made sure to blur out any faces and avoid using the company's full name initially, but the content spoke for itself. Ashley's voice came through clearly, along with her dismissive attitude and inappropriate comments. He posted the story on LinkedIn first. Within minutes, the responses started pouring in. "This is absolutely disgusting behavior," wrote Jennifer Walsh, CEO of a major consulting firm. "No one should be treated this way. I've experienced similar situations," added Kevin Park, a successful entrepreneur. "Thank you for speaking up about this." The post was shared dozens of times in the first hour, then hundreds. By evening, it had been shared over 2,000 times and had received more than 500 comments from business leaders, entrepreneurs, and employees sharing their own similar experiences. David's phone started ringing. The first call was from Channel 7 News. "Mr. Thompson, we'd like to interview you about the incident at Henderson Marketing," said the reporter. "This story is resonating with a lot of people in the business community." "I'm happy to talk," David replied, "but I want to be clear about something. This isn't about revenge, this is about accountability and making sure this doesn't happen to someone else who might not have the platform to speak up." The news story aired that evening during the 6 o'clock broadcast. By 9 p.m., it had been picked up by 3 other local stations. By midnight, it was trending on social media platforms across the region. Meanwhile, inside Henderson Marketing Solutions, Robert Henderson was having the worst night of his professional career. The first sign of trouble came at around 7 p.m. when his biggest client called. "Robert, I need to talk to you about this situation with Thompson Tech Solutions," said Patricia Williams, the marketing director for a major retail chain that represented 30% of Henderson's annual revenue. "Patricia, I want to assure you that we've handled this situation internally," Henderson said, trying to sound confident. "The employee responsible has been terminated, and we're reviewing our customer service protocols." "That's not enough, Robert," Patricia replied coldly. "Our company has very strict policies about diversity and inclusion. We can't be associated with partners who don't share those values. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to reconsider our contract." Henderson felt his stomach drop. "Patricia, please. One employee's behavior doesn't represent our entire company. We've worked together for 5 years. And in 5 years, how did you not know this was how your front desk operated?" Patricia asked. "This isn't just about one employee, Robert. This is about culture and leadership." The call ended badly. Within an hour, Henderson received 2 more similar calls from major clients. By the next morning, his phone was ringing constantly with reporters, concerned clients, and angry customers. The company's social media accounts were flooded with negative comments. Their Google reviews dropped from 4.2 stars to 1.8 stars overnight. The local business journal called asking for a statement about the Thompson incident. Henderson called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. "How bad is this?" he asked his marketing director. "Bad," she replied grimly. "We're getting calls from reporters every 10 minutes. Our website traffic is up 400%, but not in a good way. 3 clients have already canceled their contracts and 2 more are threatening to." Henderson's head of human resources spoke up. "We're also getting calls from employment lawyers. Apparently, some of Ashley's former co-workers are coming forward with stories about other incidents, things we never heard about before." That was news to Henderson. What kind of incidents? Complaints about how she treated delivery drivers, job applicants, even some of our smaller clients. People are saying she had a pattern of treating certain people differently based on how they looked or dressed. Henderson felt sick. How had he not known about this? How had Ashley's behavior gone unchecked for so long? His assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Mr. Henderson, Channel 12 News is here. They want a statement about the Thompson situation." Henderson looked around the table at his senior staff. These were good people who had worked hard to build the company. Now their livelihoods were threatened because of one employee's actions and his failure as a leader to create proper oversight. "What should I tell them?" Henderson asked. "The truth," said his marketing director. "Apologize sincerely. Take responsibility. Explain what you're doing to make sure this never happens again." The news interview didn't go well. Henderson was nervous and defensive, and his apologies sounded rehearsed. When the reporter asked him how Ashley had been employed for 2 years without anyone noticing her problematic behavior, Henderson stumbled over his answer. We trusted our employees to represent the company professionally," he said. "Obviously, we need to do better." "But Mr. Thompson says he recorded the entire interaction because he wanted to document what happened," the reporter pressed. "That suggests this went on for quite some time. How long was Mr. Thompson in your lobby being mistreated?" Henderson didn't have a good answer for that either. The interview aired during the evening news, and if anything, it made the situation worse. Henderson came across as out of touch and unprepared. The story was no longer just about Ashley's behavior. It was about leadership failure and corporate culture. By the end of the week, Henderson Marketing Solutions had lost 6 major clients representing over 40% of their annual revenue. The Thompson Tech Solutions contract, which would have been worth $2.3 million, was officially awarded to their biggest competitor. Henderson found himself in the strange position of having to reassure his remaining employees that the company would survive. But privately, he was running the numbers and they weren't good. The company's reputation was in ruins. Their ability to attract new clients was severely compromised. And the worst part was that Henderson knew it was deserved. He had failed as a leader. He had created an environment where someone like Ashley felt comfortable treating people with disrespect and prejudice. And now everyone was paying the price for his failure. Late at night, Henderson sat in his office looking out at the city lights and wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Just 1 week ago, he had been running a successful company with a bright future. Now he was fighting for survival, and it was all because he had failed to ensure that everyone who walked through his doors was treated with basic human dignity. 6 months later, David Thompson stood at the podium of the Regional Business Excellence Awards, looking out at an audience of over 500 business leaders. His company, Thompson Tech Solutions, had just been named Business of the Year for their innovative approach to corporate consulting and their commitment to workplace diversity. "When I started this company 15 years ago," David began, "I never imagined I'd be standing here talking about something that happened in a lobby 6 months ago. But sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. The story of what happened at Henderson Marketing had become legendary in local business circles, not just for what occurred, but for how it had changed the conversation about respect and professionalism in the workplace. "That day taught me something important," David continued. "It's not enough to build a successful business if you're not also building a better business community. Success without responsibility is just selfishness." In the audience, several people nodded in agreement. Many of them had been inspired by David's response to the incident to examine their own company cultures and make necessary changes. After his speech, David was approached by a young woman who looked nervous but determined. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "my name is Lisa Chen. I work in human resources for a mid-sized company downtown. After what happened to you, we completely overhauled our diversity and inclusion policies. We also started mandatory respect training for all employees, especially those in customer-facing roles." David smiled. "That's exactly what we need to see more of. How has it been received by your team?" "Honestly, some people complained at first," Lisa admitted. "They said it was unnecessary, that we were overreacting to one isolated incident, but then we started hearing from employees about problems they'd experienced or witnessed that they'd never reported before. Turns out we had our own issues we didn't know about." This conversation happened more often than David could count. The Henderson incident had become a catalyst for change across the business community. Companies were reviewing their hiring practices, updating their training programs, and taking a harder look at their workplace cultures. But the story had different endings for different people. Henderson Marketing Solutions had struggled through the aftermath of the publicity. Robert Henderson had tried everything to save his company. He issued public apologies, implemented new training programs, and even hired a diversity consultant to help rebuild their culture. But the damage was too severe. The loss of major clients had created a cash flow crisis that Henderson couldn't overcome. 3 months after the incident, he was forced to lay off half his staff. 6 months later, the company filed for bankruptcy. Henderson himself had learned hard lessons about leadership and accountability. He eventually found work as a marketing consultant for other companies, but his days of running his own business were over. In interviews, he always admitted that the company's failure was his fault as a leader, not just Ashley's fault as an employee. "I created an environment where that kind of behavior could exist," he told a Business Journal reporter. "As the CEO, the culture of the company was my responsibility. I failed in that responsibility, and good people lost their jobs because of my failure." Ashley's story was perhaps the most complicated of all. After being fired from Henderson Marketing, she struggled to find new employment. Word had spread through the business community about what had happened, and her behavior had been so widely publicized that many employers were reluctant to hire her. She eventually moved to another city to start fresh, but the experience had clearly affected her deeply. In a rare interview she gave to a local newspaper, Ashley admitted that she had been forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about herself. "I never thought of myself as a prejudiced person," she said. "I told myself that I treated everyone the same, but when I looked back honestly at how I behaved, I realized that wasn't true. I had different standards for different people, and I didn't even realize I was doing it." Ashley had enrolled in community college and was studying social work, hoping to find a way to make amends for her past behavior by helping others. "I can't undo what I did," she continued, "but I can try to do better going forward, and maybe I can help other people recognize these patterns in themselves before they make the same mistakes I did." Meanwhile, David had used his platform to create lasting change beyond just that one incident. He established the Thompson Foundation for Workplace Equity, which provided training and resources to companies wanting to improve their diversity and inclusion practices. The foundation also offered scholarships to minority students studying business and mentorship programs for young entrepreneurs who might face some of the same challenges David had experienced throughout his career. "The goal isn't to punish people for making mistakes," David explained to a group of college students during a speaking engagement. "The goal is to create systems and cultures where those mistakes are less likely to happen in the first place." One of the most successful programs the foundation launched was called Walk in My Shoes. It paired business leaders with employees from different backgrounds to spend a day experiencing what it was like to navigate the workplace from a different perspective. The program had eye-opening results. Many executives discovered biases and barriers they had never noticed before. Customer service representatives learned about the challenges faced by people who didn't fit their assumptions about what a successful person looked like. David's own company had become a model for inclusive business practices. Thompson Tech Solutions now had one of the most diverse workforces in the region, not because they lowered their standards, but because they had removed barriers that had previously prevented talented people from being considered. Their employee satisfaction scores were the highest they'd ever been, and their business results had improved significantly. Turns out when people feel respected and valued, they do better work. The security guard from Henderson Marketing, whose name was Frank Rodriguez, had also learned from the experience. He found a new job with a company that valued his judgment and treated all visitors with respect, regardless of their appearance. "I should have spoken up that day," Frank told his new supervisor during his first week. "I knew what was happening, wasn't right, but I didn't want to cause trouble. I learned that sometimes causing a little trouble is exactly what you need to do." The ripple effects continued to spread throughout the business community. The local Chamber of Commerce started requiring diversity and inclusion training for all member companies. Business schools began teaching case studies based on the Henderson incident. Young entrepreneurs were starting companies with inclusive values built in from day one. Perhaps most importantly, the conversation had changed. People were more aware of their own biases and more willing to speak up when they saw unfair treatment happening. David often reflected on how a simple business meeting had turned into something much larger. He hadn't set out to become an advocate for workplace equity, but sometimes life pushes you toward the role you're meant to play. One person's bad decision created an opportunity for everyone to do better, David said in his final interview about the incident. That's how change really happens. Not through grand gestures, but through ordinary people deciding to be better than they were yesterday. The story had become more than just a cautionary tale about treating people with respect. It had become a roadmap for how businesses and individuals could learn from mistakes, take responsibility, and create positive change. And in boardrooms and lobbies across the country, the question was no longer whether diversity and inclusion mattered in business. The question was how quickly companies could implement the changes needed to ensure that what happened at Henderson Marketing would never happen again.